paper in front of me.
Well, good evening. I'm Lou Hitzrodt. I'm a member of the Exeter Community Power Aggregation Committee. I'm actually sitting in here for Dave Sharples, who couldn't be here tonight. And you will see in a few minutes a panel discussion that we filmed about a week ago explaining community power. And community power is a way for Exeter to purchase its own power, with Unitil still being our distributor. But I think the film will explain most of what needs to be explained. And following the panel film, the panel discussion, the floor will be open for questions from the community. The panel will be here to answer those questions. So I think we should just go ahead and roll the video of the panel discussion.
Good evening. The town of Exeter is looking into a new approach for purchasing electricity for town residents and businesses. This new approach is called Community Power. I'm Dave Sharples, Exeter's town planner, and I'm here tonight to moderate a panel discussion. The purpose of tonight's program is to explain to Exeter residents how community power works and how residents and businesses might benefit from it. The panel was organized by Exeter's Community Power Aggregation Committee, and the committee has prepared a list of questions that I will direct to the panelists. Following the conclusion of the panel discussion, viewers will have the opportunity to ask questions directly to the panelists. First, I will have the panel members introduce themselves. Okay.
Hi, I'm Nick Devonshire. I'm an Exeter resident and I'm a member of the committee. And full-time, I'm the Director of Investments at Clean Capital.
Good evening. I'm Cliff Sennett. I'm a member of the Exeter Energy Committee and also a member of the Community Aggregation Committee.
I am Henry Herndon. I am a consultant who is working with a number of communities around the state on community power. I'm also working with Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire. I'm glad to be here tonight with the Exeter team.
Hi, I'm Alec O'Mara. I am on the communications team at Unitil, the local electricity and natural gas provider, and I'm also a resident here in Exeter.
We'll go
and I'm Julia Griffin, manager in Hanover, and I was a member of the organizing group that developed the approach for Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, panel. And I will ask the questions, and I will mention who I'm asking the question to. And the first question is for Julia, can answer first, and then Cliff. And the first question is, what is a community power aggregation, or CPA, and how might Exeter's residential and commercial consumers benefit from participation in Exeter's CPA? Julia?
So, yes, thank you. Community Power Aggregation, or CPA, is essentially like a buying cooperative made up of customers within a municipal unit or a county unit in the state of New Hampshire. The notion behind community power aggregation is that to the extent you can pool your purchasing of electricity in the wholesale marketplace on behalf of a large number of electricity customers, you typically obtain a much more competitive rate for that electricity, including the potential for buying substantially greener, if not 100% green power. We're basing the New Hampshire model on some very successful aggregations that are already operating in other parts of the country, particularly in the state of California, but also several in the Midwest. And there's actually one on Cape Cod and several in Massachusetts that have been very effective in procuring power, focusing initially on retail customers. So retail customers are folks who are buying residential electricity as individual households or small businesses, and ultimately looking to bring larger power consumers into the aggregation as well. The idea is that by harnessing the buying power of a large number of accounts, you become a much more competitive, essentially, entrant to the wholesale marketplace and can obtain much more competitive electricity pricing, as well as really select your own mix of electricity in terms of the percentage green. So that's the basis for the community power aggregation approach. And we're in New Hampshire working off a statute 93E, which enables communities to aggregate their purchase of electricity. And that formed the basis of creating individual municipal aggregations and also bringing together communities in Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire.
Thank you. Cliff?
Thanks, Julia. We thought a good way to illustrate what community power is to show you a sample Unitil bill for a resident in Exeter that shows sort of the breakdown of the different aspects of the charges that appear on that bill. Because community power really focuses on the electric supply, the energy supply itself, not the distribution function that Unitil provides. So here's a copy of someone's bill. I would point out that this is a little bit more complicated than a typical bill in that this particular customer must have solar panels or some source of alternative generation because there's a net metering aspect of this bill, but we can ignore that for the case of illustration here and have a look at the orange highlight. That shows the first portion of the bill, which is the cost of distribution and maintenance of the distribution system. So that's the piece that Unitil provides. It is there's a customer charge basically for having an account and a meter and so forth. And then based on the amount of kilowatt hours used, a rate that gets applied to that to pay for the distribution costs. Below that is the energy supply portion of the bill, and that's really what we're talking about here. This is what community power is about. It's not about changing the provider of your power through, which is Unitil. Nothing changes there. What can change if you opt in, unless you opt out of it, is that the source of power, where the power is purchased from, which then gets distributed through Unitil, that changes. So that area that's highlighted, if Exeter goes forward with community power, could be from a different source, or would be from a different source. It would probably be labeled something different. And there may be different choices, and we hope there will be different choices that you'll have to choose from as far as where the power comes from, how much of it is renewable, and so forth. We'll get into that a little bit more later. So, and lastly, just to point out that what you're paying for the energy itself is highlighted in red. That's the kilowatt hour charge that goes with that source of energy. It's slightly different than the hour charge that goes for the distribution, but they add up to the total monthly bill. I guess the thing that we would also want to point out is that when this goes into effect, you will have some choice, or we hope that you will have some choice in terms of the kind of energy sources that that may enter into that mix. Right now, the percentage of renewable that makes up from what's called the default energy supply is around 22%, I think, something like that. And with community power, we may have the option to increase that to a different level or tier of a renewable content, like 50% or 80%, something like that. So, and that comes to the large reason why the Exeter Energy Committee was interested in pursuing community power, which is we want residents and customers in town to have more options when it comes to renewable sources, being, choosing to have more renewable sources for their energy supply.
Thank you. Thank you, Cliff. Yep. Second question is also directed at Julia and Cliff. And why is the town pursuing community power aggregation, or CPA, in the first place, and why now? Julia?
So we have an interesting opportunity that arose in 2019. And this was as the result of some fairly significant legislative efforts on the part of a large group of individuals who wanted to pursue community power aggregations at the municipal level. RSA 53E was amended to make a community power program opt out rather than opt in. Previously, retail customers would have to raise their hand and proactively say, I'd like to be involved in the aggregation in order to be enrolled. Whereas with an opt-out program, everybody is assumed to be in the aggregation unless somebody says, I would not like to be involved, or they're already purchasing their electricity from an alternate energy supplier. That was a significant amendment. Because we saw from models on the West Coast that opt-out was really the only way to go in terms of getting the sheer number of customers you needed to have an effective aggregation. As soon as that legislation was adopted by the legislature and the governor signed the bill, we got to work forming the Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire concept. The planning group started meeting in late fall, early winter of 2019, and has been meeting consistently since then, leading to the formation of CPC&H, which incorporated on October 1st, and also resulting in a number of communities as sort of the New Hampshire guinea pigs going forward to develop their own individual municipal electricity aggregation plans, and taking those aggregation plans either to town meeting in the case of Harrisville and Hanover, or to the city council in the cases of Lebanon and in Keene, to become Hanover Community Power, Lebanon Community Power, Harrisville Community Power, and Keene Community Power. So the change of the statute in 2019 was really what sort of opened the floodgates for us, and it's taken us 2 years to get fully organized, up and running, and to do all the homework we needed to do to successfully package an aggregation plan for New Hampshire in the context of New Hampshire statutes, and that's why all of this is happening now. And I think Howard can sort of talk to the issue of why this time is important for Exeter, but that gives you sort of a broad overview of why in New Hampshire now.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, Julia is exactly right. Why now is because of that significant change that was made in the law that has generated huge interest in community power all around the state, that really is embodied in the coalition that Julia helped form. I'd say why now in Exeter? There are a couple of reasons. One is the changes made in the law make it seem to us to be more viable as an initiative, and the Energy Committee is looking for ways to increase the use of renewable energy sources in the community. And we see this as a way that has huge leverage in being able to bring that about in the community, while also providing some benefits potentially in terms of cost.
Thank you. Next question is for Nick. To get into, how does a community power aggregation work?
Sure. So the thing you have to understand, as Cliff said, we're in a deregulated state, and you have service and you have supply. Service is the maintaining and installation of the wires, and that is a natural monopoly that Unitil does, and no one would ever be able to do that better than Unitil, I'd say. They're going to keep doing that. The supply portion is just who is out there procuring the power. And Unitil does that by default for now. But because we're in a deregulated state, you could actually sign up today with a competitive third-party retailer and sign up for 100% clean energy or another plan. You can make that switch at any time. What we're going to be doing here is making that switch to a new default service provider for Exeter, and it's going to happen pretty much instantly. Exeter citizens will still be able to switch to any default service provider they want to, whether it's Unitil or a third party that they like more. We just think that we can find a same or lower cost source of power with maybe a little bit of a higher renewables mix, and that's why we're going forward with this. Ultimately, it's something that hasn't been done that much aside from these small third-party competitive retailers, because we've never been able to switch over an entire town before like this, but this new law gives us that ability.
Thank you. This next question is for Henry and then Cliff. And what must Exeter do to form a CPA, and where is it in that process?
Sure, so the legislation, RSA 53E, lays out a pretty clear path. Step one, form a committee, a Community Power Committee, which Exeter has done, I think in May of this past year. Step two is that committee is responsible for developing a community power plan, or an electric aggregation plan, and I believe the committee is in process there as well. That plan has to go through the process to get a warrant at town meeting, so approval by the select board, and then a vote at town meeting. And if the town decides to vote in favor of approving that community power plan at the March town meeting, then that gives the town the ability to implement a program if they would so choose. So that's the main outline of the process for authorizing community power. Did you want to add anything?
No, that covers it. It's good.
Oh, thank you. Move on to the next question. And this question is for Henry. Exeter is a member of the Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire. Can you explain what the coalition is and what role they may have in Exeter's CPA?
So the coalition is a recently incorporated public nonprofit here in the state, just incorporated on October 1st of this year, with 15 cities and towns joining together to create this new organization to share services and provide support to communities who want to pursue community power. And it's really an organization that is of communities by communities, so created by cities and towns to serve cities and towns, and sort of based in this idea of stronger together. So what the coalition really does is sort of in three categories. The first is supporting implementation, so that process where you develop a plan and bring it to town meeting. The coalition can share resources and provide technical assistance across those 15 communities and other communities that would join. Secondly, after a plan has been authorized, really enhancing that economy of scale in terms of procurement and providing the sophisticated staff capacity to service all the different members in terms of procuring power at the wholesale market, managing risk, and really empowering the communities with greater buying power, but also the ability to really compose a portfolio of energy supply resources, mixing in renewables and things like that. The third portion is really on the energy innovation side, so working with communities like Exeter to develop more local energy resources, be that a local solar array or energy storage, but also empowering the residents and businesses with new innovative options, be that battery storage or electric vehicle charging or things of that nature that you can really integrate into community power to lower costs for the community as a whole. So those are some of the areas that the coalition will be supporting Exeter and a number of other communities across the state in.
Next question. This one's for Nick. If Exeter's Energy Aggregation Plan, or EAP, is approved by the Select Board and adopted by town vote at town meeting, will I be required to participate in the Community Power Program? How will customers be notified, and can they decide not to participate in Exeter's Community Power if they so choose?
So in short, no, you're not required to participate. You'll be given a mailer where you'll kind of be notified ahead of time of what the rates are, and you'll have 30 days to respond. But no, you're not forced to participate. You have the option, as I mentioned, to switch to any retailer that you want right now, and we are by no means going to take away that option. We are going to switch the default supplier, though, and so if unless you opt out, you will be switched over to that supplier. However, you'll still always have the option to switch over to any party that you want. If you already made that switch, say you decided you wanted a 100% clean energy retailer and you made that switch already, we won't be changing those folks. We figured since you've already made that decision to switch to a new retailer, we won't change you, but you will certainly have the option to join the CPC and an Asian rate as well.
just so I'm clear, I think you said that, you can, you automatically opt in, and then you can opt out at any time?
At any time.
6 months, year, what have you?
Yeah,
Okay, at any time.
You know, we're not looking here to limit people's options from what they had before. That wouldn't be prudent for the citizens of Exeter. It's just that we're going to switch the default supplier, but the options that you have will still completely be the same. And switching that default supplier, we're also going to make sure that we're being right by citizens who don't check their electricity bill all the time. If, you know, we're going to make the switch if it can be at the same cost or cheaper, and if it can improve the overall renewables percentage. If it can't meet that, then there doesn't seem to be a reason to switch. So we got to make sure that we're getting a better deal as the default service.
Okay, thank you.
And Dave, just to reiterate one thing that Nick said, and that is that this switch doesn't happen without notification. It does happen automatically, but you're notified that it's going to, and you have that opportunity to opt out at that point.
Or anytime. You know,
Yeah.
if you choose not to, you can always do it, you know, 3 months, 6 months, a year down the road. Thank you for that. This question is from Alec at Unitil. Unitil is the utility that currently supplies Exeter's electricity needs. What services does Unitil provide now, and how will Unitil's role change if Exeter forms a CPA and adopts an energy aggregation plan?
Sure. Well, like Cliff and Nick said, aggregation really doesn't have any impact on Unitil as an electric provider. As they said very eloquently, we are specifically regulated, as everything we do. We're highly regulated as to the way we negotiate the supply, the default supply, how we go about it. We have to do it every 6 months, and what percentage of that is renewables. That's also set by the state. So we have to follow that very prescripted process and go out and get that market cost of electricity, and that supply rate is exactly that rate that we end up with. There's no additional charges that Unitil puts in that. It's very specifically designed to be the market cost of electricity for that 6-month period. Aggregation is something that we are familiar with as Unitil. We actually have a couple communities in Massachusetts that do it. Their focus is more primarily cost-based. They look to try and do contracts outside of that traditional 6-month period, maybe go a year long to try and bring down the cost during the winter time. Usually each community has a different focus as to what they're doing, but the impact ultimately to Unitil is zero.
Thank you. Can you also explain a little bit more about the difference between electrical delivery charges and electric supplier charges that folks currently see on their Unitil bill, and describe anything that will change on folks' bills if they decide to participate in the Exeter Community Power?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a huge thing that I often talk with folks, because they don't understand what it means when I say Unitil is a distribution utility. What that means is we're deregulated. We don't own any power plants. We aren't part of the power generation process in New Hampshire. So you have that supply piece, which again represents the cost of the electricity itself, and then you have the delivery charges. And the delivery charges are really the Unitil part of the bill. That's where everything that isn't the actual electricity comes about. That's where our facilities, our people, the work that it takes to keep the system running, making sure we have our call center up and running and able to answer folks, billing. It's all of those other pieces that make part of what the electricity service is for our customers. And then, like on the supply side, everything we do there is highly regulated by the state. They look at all of those costs and they examine them and they make sure that what we're doing is prudently expenditured. So that's what happens on our side. That's why you see those two separate line items on the bill. Effectively, my understanding is that when you have an aggregation change, really the only change you see is a difference in the line item on the Unitil bill that shows that it's coming from a different supplier.
Next question is for Cliff. What choice will individual consumers have concerning the source of their electric supply, and will individual customers be able to choose options with varying amounts of renewable energy?
As I mentioned earlier, one of the main reasons that we're embarking on this is to increase the choice that customers have in terms of the amount of renewable energy sources that they can include in their energy supply. So, and all of the communities in New Hampshire that have worked on this, have adopted their electric aggregation plans, have followed a similar path, in that they have a sort of a default choice, which is sort of mimics what the default supplier that Unitil, the default supply that Unitil has be similar to that in terms of renewables. There would be an additional level of renewables that might be 50% instead of 22%, and then one that's even higher than that, sort of different levels of renewability in the supply that people may be interested in. And we hope to make that choice and allow people to choose which they prefer, whether they're more price conscious or more energy source conscious.
That's a good segue for the next question that I have for Julia, is what about low-income customers? Will they be accommodated, and if so, how?
Yes, they will. So the Electricity Assistance Program is a program that's already up and running in New Hampshire. It was implemented as part of deregulation back in the 1990s when the legislature voted to deregulate the state. And we all, when we pay our electricity bill, pay a line item called Systems Benefit Charge. A portion of the proceeds from the system benefits charge that we all pay goes into a special fund to provide subsidies, essentially, for income qualifying households or individual customers. And the subsidy ranges anywhere from 8% to 76% of the cost of the electricity bill, depending on one's income. So that electric assistance program will not go away just because you as an individual or a community essentially implements a community power aggregation. Unitil, in the case of Exeter, will still be your electricity supplier, and that electric assistance program will continue to function just as it does today. So anybody who is income eligible will continue to be eligible for the same level of subsidy.
Thank you, Julia. This question's for Nick. If Exeter adopts an energy aggregation plan, or EAP, that authorizes its CPA to work with vendors to purchase electricity for the town residents and businesses, what are the risks to those residential and commercial consumers?
The risks are ultimately small. Again, because you can switch to any party at any time. If something were to happen and CPCNH or whoever our third-party supplier would be, if they were to suddenly need to increase the rates for some reason, you can always switch to a lower rate, and we're never prohibiting someone from doing that. And the committee will also continue to watch, is the CPCNH option or the third-party option, is that the best option for the citizens of Exeter? But the risk ultimately is small because it's not the committee here that's procuring the power. It's going to be a group effort with a lot of the towns that have already been mentioned, all shipping in and buying power together. So you should be able to get great rates that are competitive with whatever the default supply from Unitil would be. Naturally, the price of power goes up and down with the price of natural gas and weather and that sort of thing. But ultimately, we think that there should be no impact to the citizens of Exeter that would, somehow get them on the hook for a large bill or a higher cost of power than they originally would have had under Unitil. We're going to make sure that doesn't happen.
Thank you. And as just to follow up on that, what you had mentioned, if you monitor it, consistently and see if a third party might provide a lower rate. In that scenario, what would you do? Do you, notify the customers of that option? How do you deal with that at that time?
I think we would probably go through the same exercise that we're going through here. We would just say, look, we're switching the default supply of the citizens of Exeter to this now because we found an even better option. There's no reason that we can only do this once. Now, it's probably not something that we want to be doing because we're sending out mailers and that sort of thing, but the whole idea here is we think we can find a better group rate for the citizens of Exeter, and we're going to take that.
Great, thank you. This next question is for Henry. Currently, Unitil and the PUC set the rates, well, the PUC is the Public Utilities Commission. So currently, Unitil and the PUC set the rates for its electricity customers. Who will set the rates if Exeter forms a CPA?
So in terms of the delivery portion, which Alec described very well, the Public Utility Commission and Unitil are going to continue to set the rate for delivery for the poles and wires and for the distribution system that delivers the power. What's changing is the energy supply portion. That is now going to be set by Exeter Community Power.
Thank you, Henry. This next question is for Julia. Have other communities in New Hampshire established CPAs, and if so, where are they in the process and how successful have they been? I know you touched on this a little bit earlier, but feel free to expand. Thank you.
Sure. So to date, 4 communities in New Hampshire have adopted electric aggregation plans. Keene was the first, and then Harrisville, the town of Harrisville, at their town meeting in May. The town of Hanover adopted their electric aggregation plan at our town meeting in July, and then Lebanon adopted their plan in September. In addition, there are another dozen plus communities like Exeter that are in active drafting stage of their electric aggregation plans, particularly the communities that have March town meetings, realize that they need to sort of work through the town meeting cycle and approach their select boards to consider adoption of plans in the December-January timeframe in time to get a warrant article on their warrant for their March town meeting. Communities with city councils, the council is their legislative body, and so they can take their plan forward at any point for public hearings with their city council to arrange to have an electric aggregation plan adopted. So I think it's entirely likely that with the end of town meeting, March town meeting season in New Hampshire next year, that you could well have 10 to 12 communities with adopted electric aggregation plans. It's a process that every community has to go through on their own. But the good news is that the organizing group that pulled together the plan for the Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire also developed a good draft boilerplate for an aggregation plan, which we hope helps communities not to have to start at zero, but really get a leg up on developing a plan that's already passed muster with state regulators.
Thank you, Julia. And Cliff, if it goes forward, when do you reasonably expect Exeter's CPA to begin?
Well, the Aggregation Committee has a timeline that we've developed, and our ultimate goal is to have the question before the town this March. Backing up from that, that means that we need to have our draft aggregation plan completed toward the end of November, early December, have it presented to the selectmen in December, early January, and have them make a decision at that point whether to go forward to put it on the warrant for March. Along with that, there's a lot of other activity that will also go on. We'll have several public hearings about focused on the plan itself. We have public informational brochure that we're developing. This panel is designed to help get the word out about what this is all about, and a lot of other things to try to make sure people are well informed about what we're doing. But our goal, again, is to have this question before the town this March.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Cliff.
Dave, I should say, that's the adoption of it. So what would happen after that, I think, in terms of when people would actually would potentially see this option to choose, for example, different tiers of energy supply, that's a little less clear. Several months after the adoption at town meeting, it would take some time to, I think it also depends on how the coalition is doing in terms of developing energy contracts or other third-party supplies that we may be looking at.
And if I could just add to that.
Certainly.
So another factor is the Public Utility Commission, as required by law, has to put forward regulatory rules that sort of govern the relationship between the distribution utility and the community power program, and talk about data sharing and some of the other details that go on behind the scenes. So those have yet to be completed by the Public Utility Commission, and that's another thing that has to occur before Exeter Community Power and all the other community power programs around the state officially launch and begin providing electricity to their communities.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any comments on that?
Very important comment. If your power does go out, do not call the Exeter Aggregation Committee. Do not call CPCNH or wherever your third-party provider ends up being. You call Unitil. Again, they are still going to be responsible for the wires. That is their business. If you have opinions on what hedge contracts should be struck to procure that power and how much we should be buying from the spot market versus 6-month hedges, that you can direct to the committee or whoever that retailer is. But do not call us if the power goes out. We will not be able to help you, unfortunately.
Well, great comment. Thank you very much. So that ends our questions for this evening. And on behalf of the Exeter Community Aggregation Committee, I want to thank all of you for your time and remind viewers that members of the panel are now available for viewers who would like to ask any questions that you might have.
Well, good.
Got a new shirt.
We're back live in the Exeter TV studios. I hope that video is helpful in explaining to the viewing public what community power is all about and why we're looking into it for Exeter. As you know, we'll be having a live Q&A almost immediately, but before we go into that, I thought it might be a good idea just to have the panel reintroduce themselves, particularly for those who might have tuned in late. So we're all here in the studio except for Julia, who is on Zoom from Hanover. So Julia, why don't you start, and then we'll go around, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Sure. Thanks, Lou. So my name is Julia Grifton. I'm the town manager for the town of Hanover and also an active member of our Electric Aggregation Committee and was a member of the organizing committee for CPCNH.
I'm Nick Devonshire. I'm a member of the committee here in Exeter, Exeter resident, and then the Director of Investments at Clean Capital is my full-time job.
I'm Cliff Sinnott. I'm a member of the Energy Committee here in Exeter and also on the Electric Aggregation Committee.
I'm Henry Herndon. I'm a consultant who's been supporting Exeter Community Power and a number of other community power programs around the state.
I'm Alec O'Mara. I'm a member of the communications team at Unitil, and I'm also a resident of Exeter.
Okay, I'm told by Bob Glowacki of Exeter TV that questions will pop up on my screen, and I will read off those questions and direct them to the panel. So here's the first question, and this is for Julia. Ms. Griffin, it seems that Hanover and Exeter have many similarities. As the town manager of Hanover, what benefits do you expect from Hanover's participation in a community power program?
So Hanover became a Ready for 100 community at town meeting in May of 2017. So we as a community, community-wide, not just the municipal entity, committed to reaching a goal of the entire community using 100% renewable electricity by 2030. In order to reach that goal, we knew we needed to figure out a way to move as many of our default residential and small business customers in Hanover to a 100% green electricity product. And it became very clear to us in the process of exploring what options we had under statute in New Hampshire to do that, that we first needed to get the statute revised to allow community power aggregation through an opt-in, an opt-out approach, so that everybody's considered in unless they actually opt out of the program, and to form a much larger statewide coalition through an entity like Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire that could provide the organizational framework, the support, and the staff to do all of the power procurement for the communities participating in this set of municipal aggregations. So our commitment to 100% green electricity by 2030 has absolutely been the driver behind Hanover's involvement in this process and in working post-town meeting in May of 2017 to develop our plan for reaching our 100% goal. We worked with a consultant from California, 3 Degrees, who helped us to devise this 4-prong strategy. And the third prong of the 4-prong strategy is to form a townwide municipal aggregation to procure 100% clean power.
Thank you. The next question is from Lang Plummer. How will large companies, organizations such as PEA, Exeter Hospital, and the town of Exeter be involved in this power program? And maybe, Henry, you're the best one to answer this, or anyone else from the panel?
I'll take a stab at it. If those large energy users already go to market for a competitive supplier to purchase their own power, which I expect many of them do, they will be unaffected unless they choose to opt into Exeter Community Power. They can make an assessment and say maybe it's a better deal through Exeter Community Power. They can choose to opt in, but otherwise won't be affected. If there are any large energy users that take the default supply from Unitil, they, like any other customer, would be automatically enrolled in the program and could choose to opt out.
Okay. And here's a question from Pat Yosha. I live in a rental apartment complex. Will each renter be able to choose his or her delivery option, or will the owner of the complex make that decision for the entire population? Who wants to answer that? Cliff?
Maybe Alex can correct me if I'm wrong, but it really goes with who receives the utility bill. So if the apartment is metered separately, then that person who's living in the apartment is responsible for that electricity bill would have that choice.
And I would assume then that if it were in the hands of the owner of the complex, that the participants could ask or work with that.
Well, if it's the case of like a condominium association where they had one meter, I don't think there are too many that work that way, but to the extent that that was the case, then the homeowners association that makes decisions like that, I guess that's where you would
make a change if they wanted to
make that change.
Yeah. Here's a question from an anonymous attendee. I get frequent letters in the mail from third-party suppliers offering very attractive rates. How does what you were talking about differ? How does what you were talking about differ from those offers?
I actually was just looking at this today to see how many different, on the PUC's, the PUC maintains a website that compares energy rates from competitive suppliers, and I was looking at how many were offering services in the Exeter area, and it's about 10 or so. Mm-hmm. And or actually probably fewer companies, but many more options that, say, one company will offer 5 or 6 different options. And I would say it boils down to this, that in every single case, when you looked at a supplier that was offering a 50% or 100% renewable choice, the cost was in the order of, I would say, 60 to 100% more expensive than the current utility default rate. So the point here is that with the help of organizations like the Coalition or other aggregators that can bring together large numbers of customers to increase that sort of the amount of demand we're shopping for, that we can reduce those rates and make it less expensive for people to choose more renewable sources.
And just to build on that, so that's, like, I think one key difference is exactly right, the economy of scale, better purchasing power than you'd get as an individual customer in one household shopping around. The second piece is consumer protections. So through Exeter Community Power and the Community Power Coalition, there's really a high level of oversight to ensure that there aren't, teaser rates in these kinds of programs or other, misleading things that, the vast majority of suppliers and brokers in the market are above board and provide good service, but there are cases where you don't understand the fine print and you have a teaser rate, it's a low rate, and then it jumps up over time. So there's consumer protection built into the community power approach to ensure that there's good oversight for the programs.
Great. We have another question, anonymous attendee. The PUC has yet to come up with rules and regulations to govern community power in New Hampshire. Is it possible that those regulations could eliminate the possibility of community power in Exeter and other towns in New Hampshire?
I'd say no. There's pretty clear statutory authority and direction to enable community power, and the rules are really just about sorting out some of the details of how some of the interactions between utility companies and community power programs would run. So I think there's a very, very low possibility of that outcome occurring.
Good.
One thing I would add to that, though, is that there is a possibility that there was a question during the panel about how long will it take before this is up and running, and that is and Henry mentioned then, and I think it's worth emphasizing, that if the town meeting approves this and we start to move forward to launch the program, we really won't be able to begin it until those rules are in place and our plans approved.
Mm-hmm. Another question from Lang Plummer. Rockingham Planning Commission helps communities to obtain competitive pricing by signing up to provide a better rate with a larger customer base. Does Exeter participate in any such program currently?
I'm not too familiar with the specifics, but the town does purchase is involved with an aggregation program for municipal electricity that it purchases. So yes.
I believe that's all the questions we have, unless, Bob, are there any others that are coming up? One. Let's see if I can. Well, it's not scrolling.
It's the down arrow button.
Yeah, let's just try the down arrow button and see if it...
No, you should be able to, if you hold the...
There we go.
There you go.
Well, where'd it go? Oh, for Alec O'Mara. Mr. O'Mara, if Exeter adopts a community power program, will this cause problems for Unitil?
No. We talked about that a little bit during the panel. There's a real clear distinction between the supply part of the bill, which is what's talked about when you talk about aggregate power, and the Unitil part of the bill, which is the distribution part of the bill. Unitil actually already works with some aggregated communities. Those are in the state of Massachusetts, actually. We've had a long relationship. We've been doing that for a number of years, and it's really been a seamless process for our customers. So there would not be an impact to Unitil for a town to be looking at an aggregated power option.
Okay. Another question from anonymous attendee. Will there be public hearings on this issue? Where can we get printed info to read at home? Cliff?
Yes, there will be printed info. As I think Lou mentioned early in the meeting, we have some public informational flyers that have been prepared There'll be copies of that available both on the town's website, on the community aggregation plans section of that website, as well as copies available at the town hall. We are working presently on the Exeter Energy Aggregation Plan. We have a pretty complete draft of it that I would say by the time we have our first public hearing, which will be on the 29th of November, we'll have that completed draft plan. In fact, one of the purposes of that hearing will be to go over the contents of the plan and take questions about it. We have a follow-up hearing 2 weeks from then. I believe it's on the December 13th. Both of them are at 7 p.m. And they're both going to be in the Novak room at the town office building. So I would encourage folks to have questions, that want more information about the content of the plan and how the program would work, to attend those hearings.
Good, thanks. Oh,
And maybe it's worth saying just what's the step after that, because I'm new to Exeter and kind of learning the whole process. So.
Yep. We are tentatively going to talk to the selectmen on the Monday in between those two hearings, which December 6th? December 6th, to present them this draft plan, and again, go over the contents. And they will then take that under advisement and make their decision sometime in the month of December, I would think, maybe January, about whether to forward this on, to create a warrant article and include it in the town meeting warrant for March.
Good, thanks. Question from Herb Moyer. What oversight would there be for the nonprofit aggregator organization to make sure it cannot increase its costs without justification and thus remain a nonprofit? I guess that's probably for you, Henry.
It's a good question. So the way Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire is designed is that each member community, up until 21 members, has a seat on the board of directors. So it's governed by its member communities, and it's structured in a nonprofit fashion. So the board is the members make decisions about, the budget and financing and staffing and hiring and things of that nature. So really designed based on some best practices from other states in terms of ensuring that there's high quality oversight from all of the member communities.
Good, thanks.
I think there's also just a natural, the prices will keep you honest. If CPCNH or whatever third-party organization ends up being the selected organization, if they start increasing their rates and a better rate is available with a competitor, we can switch Exeter over to that competitor. It's the free market will, in a sense, keep them honest, but CPCNH also has a lot of governance structure in place already.
Okay. I think that's it. Yeah, I think.
Lou, I have a question.
Okay, we have a question from the panel. Cliff, what's your question?
Julia is such a wonderful resource. I can't pass up the opportunity to ask her a very important question, which I know will be asked, and that is, in terms of the demands on municipal staff in running or in getting involved in this kind of program, what do you anticipate the extra workload that you may see just sort of having the oversight role that you'll have, and how do you plan to manage that?
Great, thanks.
Great question, Cliff. And hence my motivation to work with the organizing group to get Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire developed and stood up. And Exeter is now a member of CPCNH, as is Hanover and 15 other communities, I believe, because we recognize we're not procurers of electricity. We don't know the marketplace. We don't have the staff expertise to run a power purchaser. We need to be able to combine our forces, retain the individual consultants and staff to do this on our behalf, and minimize the impact on individual municipal staffs. From my perspective, I think at the local community level, our energy aggregation committees and our host governments will have a couple of roles. One, as Hanover Community Power, we may be dependent on to do mailings to our residents who are in the program to alert them to updates, changes in default providers, changes in power pricing, whatever. But we do mailings to our residents all the time. So that we have those mailing lists, that's not a heavy lift. In addition, I would not be surprised if we regularly receive questions from residents about Hanover Community Power. And it would not therefore be unexpected that we as town staff would have a staff person available to help residents with their questions around general topics. But for anything in depth, we would be turning to CPC&H for that staff support. So we're generalists at the municipal level. We are not electricity specialists. We do not want to be burdened with trying to run a complex municipal aggregation either at the local or regional level, hence the creation of CPC&H.
Comments or questions from the panel? All right. Well, thank you very much, viewers. I hope this has been instructive for you, and thanks again to the panel for the time and energy we've spent on this. I would remind people that there will be public hearings, as Cliff mentioned, on November 29th and December 13th. So I'd urge you, if you have more questions, to attend one of those. In addition, we have put out a brochure, the copies of which are in the town office and also in the public library, with a lot of frequently asked questions and more information about community power. So there's another source of information for you. Thanks again for viewing, and that's it for us. Thanks.